Hello and welcome to Sustainably Talking Live. And today we've got two absolutely amazing guests. We've got Robin Boustead, an absolute guru on ESG. Robin's been on, the ESG Show, the forerunner to Sustainably Talking several times. And I once joked about Robin that there's a rumor going around that there's something he doesn't know about ESG, but I don't know what it is. And Robin is also currently mapping the Himalayas. And then we've got ocean expert Andrew Lewin. So that's two amazing guests, and we'll have them both on the show in just a few seconds. So before we get cracking, I just wanted to show you about a couple of posts I saw on LinkedIn this morning. Jamie Scar, he's posted something which I found quite staggering, really, that in the United States, data centers are using gas to generate electricity, but they can't ramp it up fast enough. So they're using lithium-ion batteries as a backup to the gas. And I found that quite fascinating, really, and it just goes to show how the staggering advances in batteries, and also shows the lie that they can't be used as backup for renewables. So they can be used for backup for gas. I think they can be used for backup for solar and wind as well. And then also, I saw this post today by Camilla Patney, and I commented on her post, and I told her I was going to mention it, who in turn was commenting on a post by Ingmar Renshog, who interviewed David Attenborough. And there's a video clip here.
If you were to pick up the phone and speak with President Trump or President Xi of China or Prime Minister Modi in India, what would you say?
I would say that the time has come to put aside national ambitions and look for an international ambition of survival.
It seems politically the tide is moving in the opposite direction from that of nations more looking inward and not as being part of a larger international community.
That's what's going to sink us in the end. That's what's going to sink us.
Okay, well, thank you, David. Hard to believe that man's 100 years old. But anyway, let's bring on Andrew and Robin onto the stage. Our guests today are Robin Boustead. Robin launched a responsible fashion brand, coached more than 100 business and sustainability reporting, written 6 books, including ESG Reporting Manual, and maps the Himalayas for fun. Robin, perhaps you could just tell us a wee bit more about yourself.
You keep on taking all the wind out of my sails, Mike. Yeah, I do that. Yes, I've been mapping the Himalaya for many, many years because it's a big place. And it's all part of a sustainable tourism mission to prove that really the people who go on a holiday can also be part of making the world a better place at the same time. And it's a big, complicated story that involves a bit of tech and AI, but we can discuss that another time.
All right, we look forward to that. And Andrew, let me call a bit up about you here. He's an expert on the oceans and host of the How to Protect the Oceans newsletter. It's a podcast, isn't it, Andrew?
It is.
And communications manager at Pisces Oceans. Perhaps you could just tell us a wee bit about yourself before we get into the show.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me on the show. I really appreciate it. My name's Andrew. I am a marine biologist. I have been for the last 25 years. I really love to talk about the ocean. I live in Ontario, Canada. So it's, I'm not near an ocean. I'm near the Great Lakes, but not near an ocean. And I think that's just perpetuated my infatuation for talking about this lovely blue planet that we have.
Okay, well, thank you for that. Just got a couple of quick fire questions for you. A game of hot and cold we like to play with guests. If you're big on this, if you think, yeah, this is great, you're hot. And if you're a bit cynical about it, you're cold, but you can be lukewarm as well. My first tipping point question for you, very brief answers, please. Tipping points in climate change. There we are, a PhD, and I want you to answer it in 30 seconds. Andrew. tipping points in climate change?
Yeah, I mean, look, I feel like when you talk, we've been talking about tipping points for a long time, for decades. When it comes to climate change, we continue to see, models being put out into the public by the UN, the IPCC, and we talk about seeing a threshold of going above 1.5 degrees Celsius above what the above back in the 1990s and so forth, and we continue to get past those points. And they keep talking about if we go past the 1.5 degrees Celsius, or even now that we're projected to go 3 degrees Celsius above what we were in the 1990s, that we're going to continue to see tipping points, which means that the world is going to change. And the world is changing. As the climate change, the world changes. We're all affected by that, and a lot of that's due to the effects that are happening to the ocean. So the atmosphere affects the ocean. The ocean affects the atmosphere, and so we get tipping points like we're going to see a rise in sea level rise. We're going to see increased sea surface temperature and even heat waves that we're seeing. It was a couple of years ago off the coast of Florida, we saw 100 degrees Fahrenheit ocean waters, which has never really been seen before, and is constant. We're seeing that more and more often. We're going to be in a super El Nino year, according to experts this year. What that means, it just means we're going to see more drastic changes in weather patterns that over the next year. It's going to be it's interesting when we talk about tipping points. There's not one tipping point drastically, but we're looking at melting of ice caps. We're seeing more fresh water come into the ocean. There's a lot to go into that we probably don't have time to go into this episode, but we will be discussing one of those big implications of a tipping point that we may see in the next 50 years or so, maybe even more, but it's still a huge change for the ocean and for the future generations.
Okay, thank you, Andrew. And Robin, as an expert on the tip of the world, maybe you have any thoughts about tipping points?
We've tipped. There's no tipping, we've tipped. I wonder, when the Titanic was going down and people started, getting up from their deck chairs, at what angle was the Titanic before they decided that they were done for? And that's exactly how I feel about tipping points. I think it's to say tipping implies that there's different stages of tipping, and there's early stage tipping, late stage tipping. I think really we should be in a paradigm of saying we've tipped, we're in this now, and there's no real going back opportunity. We're going to have to learn how to adapt very quickly to the situation that is now unfolding. In terms of the mountains, it's a done deal. The glaciers are disappearing at an increasing rate than we ever expected. The lack of consistent snowfall across mountain ranges around the world is going to dry up watersheds inevitably. We are looking at perhaps the largest single calamity that humans have ever come across, and we're arguing about whether it started yet. It's crazy.
Yeah, I agree. And I don't know why we're laughing. I suppose you have to laugh, don't you, really? But I don't know if you know this, but when you talked about the Titanic earlier, but of course, one of the passengers on the Titanic was Leonardo DiCaprio. And that raft at the end, I swear he could have got on that raft at the end. But even Leonardo isn't going to be around to help us from this one. Anyway, Andrew, maybe I could just have a chat with you for a few minutes.
Sure.
I'll say goodbye to you for 5 minutes, Andrew, and then say hello to you again shortly. Andrew.
Yes.
You spotted an article in The Guardian. Now,
I did.
Got a photograph of it here, and I can zoom in on it a little bit here. And it's about AMOC.
Yes.
Now I've got this written down because I can never remember what AMOC stands for. The Atlantic Meridional Overturning Circulation, or Gulf Stream, which I think is a subset of AMOC, which means a bit more to me than that. And the UK, of course, is on London. It's a lovely sunny day here in London. Is on the same latitude as Calgary in Canada. And Manchester, I believe, is on the same latitude as Edmonton, and in a place called Omsk in Siberia. And I think that if AMOC collapses, that's what kind of weather we're going to have in Britain. Andrew, tell me about AMOC and what's going on here and how worried should we be?
Yeah, we'll use AMOC as a acronym just to make it a little simpler to say while we explain this. But essentially, it's a circulation of ocean water, right? And it runs from the Gulf of Mexico, and it goes up the east coast of the U.S. and it kind of diverts over to the mid-Atlantic as it starts to hit southern Canada. So as it starts to hit Nova Scotia and so forth, and it starts to divert, and it goes across the Atlantic into the UK area. And what it does is it's bringing warm water. The Gulf Stream brings warm water that is highly saline, and it goes right up to Nova Scotia. It'll affect weather in Nova Scotia. It'll affect weather in the UK. And what that does is it'll as it gets into colder regions, it'll evaporate, right? And so all that as it gets colder, it just the heat evaporates. It goes into the atmosphere. It starts to create clouds because there's more water in the atmosphere, and then you start to get more precipitation. So Nova Scotia weather will change every 5 minutes because when it's affected by the Gulf Stream, as it comes in with weather, it'll get affected. The UK is known to be a little damp. I think I've never been proper,
yeah,
but
it can get a wee bit damp. Yeah, I've noticed that.
Yeah, just a little bit every once in a while. It's not always sunny, and you get a little bit warmer weather for the latitude that where it resides, right? And so having that circulation is really important to the way that the stability of the weather system that we know today. That circulation power, what happens as that warm water dissipates, it gets cold, dense salt water. It goes down to the bottom of the ocean, and it circulates back into the Gulf, back into the bottom of the Gulf Stream, and it goes deep ocean back to the Gulf of Mexico, and then it starts all over again. But what it does is it goes and it grabs all the nutrients, the oxygen, the carbon, and it'll bring it back up to the surface, and it'll have upwellings and so forth that will help feed a lot of marine mammals, sea turtles, sharks, tuna, all these different predatory fish, seabirds as well. And it's a big process in the way that the ocean runs today. Now, that circulation continues to move on a regular basis. Over the last few decades, we've seen an article either at The Guardian or CBC here in Canada or somewhere in the US or worldwide, where scientists will come out and say, hey, this circulation is actually slowing down. And what that means is that if that starts to slow down, it'll affect the weather patterns all the way throughout. And if it actually stops, is what researchers are worried about, what this article is talking about, then the entire weather system will change. The entire climate around this Gulf Stream and around AMOC will actually change. It'll probably make things a lot colder up there in the UK for you, Michael, and as well as it'll change the weather patterns over in Nova Scotia. It could cause droughts. It could cause different types of weather patterns that are going on. It could cause different storms. We don't really know the effect, but it definitely will get colder because you're not getting that warm weather that's coming up from the Gulf Stream. So it's a scary thought. And like I said, this article comes out usually once a year, and it becomes that people are starting to think, wow, this is something that we need to worry about. But then as people start to read it and it comes out every year and they see it every year, they see that pattern, they start to worry less and less because, they keep telling me this, but it hasn't happened. And this may not happen tomorrow. It may not happen 10 years from now. It may not happen 20, 30, 40. It could happen 50 plus years from now. But eventually, if we continue the way we're going, by slowing this thing down because of melting glaciers that melt fresh water, and that fresh water goes on top of that circulation, it stops the evaporation because it sits higher than the dense salt water. It stops that evaporation from happening. That circulation doesn't happen. That water doesn't dip down below the surface and come back around as a circulation because the fresh water is sitting there as a cap and it won't move at all. It's colder fresh water coming from the glaciers, and that will go throughout the northern part of the ocean.
Okay, thank you, Andrew. It's quite a difficult thing to communicate, though, because I know what human nature's like. And they're going to say, "Oh, I don't understand this climate change. One moment we're told it's going to get hotter, and now we're told it's going to get colder." And then you say, "Yeah, it might get cold in the UK, but the global temperature will go up." But for some reason, I just see problems explaining that. I foresee a communication challenge ahead.
100%, and I think it's a lot of it has to do with how drastic do you want to get? You know, because somebody be like, if somebody asked me like, how bad is it? I'm like, well, do you want the fluffy, optimistic answer, or do you want the real answer, which make you feel bad if I tell you? I think people are constantly fighting that battle, right? I can tell you that if we continue going this way, this will stop at some point, and we will have to change, right? And then I hear people say, well, you know, when you look at the map, you know, of every heat record gets broken year after year. Well, you look at Nova Scotia, and it's blue when you look at the heat map that's red in a lot of places and stuff. Well, it's blue. I'm like, it's blue because that's where the precipitation happens because of the Gulf Stream. So that means there's more water being evaporated. So they're getting more and more rain, which could lead to flooding and so forth, right? Or that will eventually change. We don't know. We haven't hit that, you know, talk about tipping points. We haven't hit that tipping point. But it's blue in that area because there's more water evaporating because the water is hotter. And so it'll evaporate at a faster rate as it gets to colder areas, right? And so it really, so like there's explanation, but you're right. It's never easy to explain on the internet, you know, climate change or anything that big. And you're talking about this massive circulation system that can affect the entire world as we know it. And we're just saying, hey, by the way, it could stop based on, you know, you having a Starbucks coffee mug, you know, as plastic. You know what I mean? It's very difficult to relate to that personally, and that makes it difficult.
Okay. All right. So, Andrew, what's the biggest threat facing the ocean today, do you think?
I'm going to say climate change is what it exacerbates everything. It makes everything worse. There's just this, but it's the cumulative effect of what's happening to the ocean. So we're looking at overfishing, climate change, plastic pollution, other marine pollution, coastal development, all these things. To be honest, the biggest threat is our lack of respect for the ocean. You know, I was interviewing a researcher here in Canada at the University of Quebec, and he's a physicist, and he works on oceans, especially looking at waves, internal waves, and so forth. And he was saying he went to the World Ocean Summit just not long ago in Montreal in March, and he was listening to a panel, and there was a Ken Paul, who's an Indigenous person who lives here in Canada, and he was saying that the problem with how we look at the ocean is we look at it as a way of like it's a natural resource and we can take things from it, but we don't respect it. And I think, that really hit me because we have to start respecting the ocean so that we can actually do something better for the ocean. So everything we look at, is this going to help the ocean? If we respect it, we respect what it does for us, what it gives to us. Every second breath of oxygen that we breathe in is from the ocean, you know, and if we start to respect it more, then we start to think about it more in every process we do, whether we're doing oil and gas, whether we're doing mining, whether we're doing ecotourism or any kind of tourism, like looking at fishing. If we respect the ocean, then we will have a better time. But right now, there's just a lack of respect. It's always an afterthought. The economy always comes first, and I know it's a big thing, but it always comes first. It's never equal. And I think if we look at growing the economy and maintaining the ocean, I think we're going to see less growth in the economy, but a better ocean, which will make things better. We're not spending, you know, trillions of dollars every year worldwide trying to get over the consequences of things like climate change.
All right, thank you. So, two questions here, really, two questions in one. So what can companies do, if indeed they can do anything? And if you're a sustainability professional, what do you actually need to know about this?
Well, I actually think companies play a huge role in this. I mean, if you look at a lot of the companies now that lobby the government so that they can get an upper hand on their business and make sure that their business survives, a lot of those companies are actually damaging the ocean. If you're a sustainability company and you're trying to do something better for the ocean, is your product or your service should have no harm or no impact on the ocean, you know, a negative impact on the ocean. If it has a positive, that's even better, right? But if you start to look out, you know, what your vision, what your mission is, and usually sustainability companies are very good at that. or they're very aware of that. I mean, Patagonia is probably the best example at this point. They make clothes. They realize when they make clothes that, they're going to have waste, and that's a bad thing. So they've decided now that all their proceeds, after paying everybody and everything, they go to environmental movements and environmental action. I think that's a huge thing for a huge company like that to be able to give back to the ocean like that, because they realize that the only reason Patagonia is there is for outdoor people who like to spend time in nature. But then they realize that what they create can affect nature, and so they want to give back. I think having that net zero impact, whether it's climate, whether it's environment, or even have a positive impact, I think is really great. And I think that's where sustainability companies, and just any company from now on, should have that in mind. Again, it comes back to the respect for the ocean and for the planet.
Okay, well, thank you for that, Andrew. Andrew, I'm going to ask you to join us again in about 5 minutes with Robin.
Love to.
But I just feel we're not even tipping the tip of the iceberg, are we? We're tipping the tip of the tip. So it'd be great to perhaps have you get on again in the not too distant future. We can drill into some of these things in a little bit more depth.
Absolutely, I would love that.
Thank you. Anyway, talking about tips, there's an expert on another tip, Robin. Hello, Robin. You've already introduced yourself. So what's an ESG expert like you doing mapping the Himalayas?
I mean, first of all, I'm probably more in love with maps than I am with ESG. So it's a love relationship that goes back to early childhood, and sitting on the floor with maps and dreams. And I think this is perhaps a story familiar to some people. I think there's two sorts of people in the world: people that love maps and people who don't. And that's just fine with me. I mean, there's nothing wrong with liking maps or not liking maps. It's just it's one of those things that you either have an affinity for or not. I've always loved the mountains. I've always loved the oceans. I've enjoyed sailing. I've enjoyed being in the outdoors. And this respect that Andrew talks about, I think, is absolutely critical to have this respect for the planet. And I think I learned my respect for the planet and also for other human beings by being in the outdoors and by doing things with other people and staying with different communities and going to different parts of the planet. And I think that indigenous, maybe ancient knowledge, whatever you want to call it, that respect that people had for weather and people had for the planet is well placed. I think it's a good idea to have respect for this rock that we live on. And if we don't respect it, it's unlikely to be kind and friendly in return. So I think it's in our own interest to do so. So ESG, that's how I earn money. I guess making maps doesn't earn you money. It's just a passion. But what I make maps of, the Himalaya, is really a critical component in this whole ESG climate change story. It's considered to be the third pole, people say. It's the most sensitive ecological area outside of the North Pole and the South Pole for climate change. It's happening on average about 3.5 degrees faster there per annum than it is elsewhere on the planet. And there's some pretty massive implications associated with water resources, human migration, agriculture, an enormous country to the south called India. And the domino effect begins with a couple of glaciers melting. And then that gradually escalates and escalates. And before you know it, you have a really serious problem. And ESG is about being able to perhaps report and navigate ourselves collectively better towards a better future, rather than keep going down the same pathway that doesn't seem to be achieving what we want it to achieve. So I think ESG and mapping the Himalaya, the long way round, as we say in Nepal, you either take the shortest way up and down or the longest way around. I'm afraid I'll answer your question the longest way around. But ESG is an intrinsic part of climate change and vice versa.
Okay, well, that's very good. I used to like maps when I was younger. I think that my iPhone has kind of done away with that a little bit. Now it's not so much fun, is it? It's become a very practical thing looking at maps. But I know when I was a kid, I'd get an atlas out and I'd spend ages staring at it. And my dad used to as well. We used to sit next to each other staring at an atlas, which might seem a bit weird now. I suppose it does sound a bit weird, but I don't think it was an uncommon thing to do back then.
I think now maps, like everything else, are much more interactive. You know, previously a map was just this sheet of paper with colours on it, and now, I mean, the maps that we use are, you know, digital vector files where you can, you know, manipulate the images in lots and lots of different ways. We use it for identifying hazard and risk mapping. So if people go trekking in the Himalaya and they're sleeping in a lodge at night, they're nice and warm and cozy. But maybe that lodge is situated in, you know, the path of a potential landslide or of a glacial lake outburst flood, which are pretty well instant and devastating. And one of the things I feel, you know, working in tourism, especially Himalayan tourism, I'd be lacking in my duty of care if I didn't at least have some appreciation of the potential hazards that people face when they go into the outdoors, and obviously for the communities that live there. So managing climate change, I think this is what we're trying to do now. We said earlier we've tipped. Well, now we're dealing with the consequences. And glacial lake outbursts, floods are very real consequences, and we should be trying to prepare ourselves for them as best we can.
Okay, thanks, Robin. And so there's also a rather large country to the east of the Himalayas. I believe it's called China. And in a decade or so's time, I think China and India will be the two biggest economies in the world. And it seems to me that they have a common source for their fresh water, because an awful lot of fresh water flowing into those two countries has its origin in the Himalayas, I believe. So how critical are the Himalayas to global water security?
Yeah, well, I mean, as Andrew was saying earlier, yeah, AMOC actually helps drive the jet stream as well. And the jet stream is the weather system that goes around the world and helps distribute water systems, monsoons, all that kind of stuff in different regions. Now, if AMOC starts getting disrupted, well, then the jet stream starts getting disrupted. And if the jet stream gets disrupted, as it already is, then the amount of precipitation starts getting disrupted. And if the precipitation changes, then the amount of snow falling on the Himalaya changes, which has been happening for the last 20 years. Now, yet again, year after year, we're seeing less and less accumulated snow being deposited on the mountains because the snow arrives and then melts very quickly. So we don't have this build-up in glaciers and in snow mass. What we have is the opposite. We have glaciers melting because of warming temperatures. Now that's for the next 20, 30 years, maybe less, because it's happening much faster and compounding much faster than we expected. That's going to allow fresh water to flow down out of the mountains to India and to China, and for farmers to be able to use it. Although the farmers are actually pumping the water out of the ground faster than it can go into the ground, so the natural aquifers throughout, especially the Gangetic Basin, are already really quite dry. So there's a reducing amount of water being supplied. There's an increasing demand for it. And sooner or later, that supply is going to stop. Probably around 2040, 2050, we're going to start seeing rivers not being able to flow as well as they can. And the monsoon isn't going to be able to replenish the aquifers and the water stocks to the same degree. So now we have farmers who are not able to grow crops for 8 months of the year, maybe 9 months of the year. And that's not going to be able to feed the families. It's not going to be able to feed the economy. Agriculture is a primary resource throughout the Gangetic Basin. What do 350 million people on the south side of the Himalaya, another 250 million people on the north side of the Himalaya, what are they going to do? They can't live there anymore. So they're going to move. They're going to go somewhere else.
Indeed.
And I think that we are looking at the domino effect to what will become the largest mass migration the world has ever seen. And it's all for bad reason, and it's going to become very competitive. If we think that this insular approach to boundaries and setting borders and the world that we live in at the moment is nice and stable. give it a few decades, and we'll see just how stable those borders are.
And ironically, those politicians who are most vocally anti-immigration are also the ones that tend to be cynical about climate change, which is the very thing that could cause immigration to get much, much greater.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to bring Andrew back on now. Robin, there's so much more we could talk about, and I'd like to get you back on again as well. I think I need to get you both on individually, because there's way too much to talk about with both of you. But you both work in very different environments. So, so what similarities do you see between protecting the oceans and protecting the Himalayas?
Go ahead, Robin, you start off.
I mean, they're intrinsically connected. This is the big round ball that we float around in the cosmos on, and the weather systems and the land systems, the terrestrial implications of climate change, and the aqueous implications of climate change are interrelated in ways we cannot even possibly fathom. Excuse the depth phrase. I can't imagine that you could think about life without thinking about water. It's an intrinsic part of existence. And I also can't think that you would think about life without thinking about the earth. This little piece of topsoil that we have around the planet from which we rely on for growing all the food that we eat.
Yeah, I've heard of it. Yeah.
So, I mean, they're one and the same thing. We are, 80% water? I can't remember now. So without water, there'd be no life on Earth. And if we have bad water, if we have unpredictable water, well, that's at the very least going to put everybody in a bad mood, isn't it? I don't want to live in a world like that.
Oh, 100%. I also think, we take water for granted. Whether you think about the ocean, whether you think about the Himalayas, maybe even the Himalayas even more so, because people don't think about water when they think of a mountainous range, although it's as we've heard from Robin, it's extremely important. I think, the lack of connectivity to each of those environments. Now, obviously, like going to the Himalayas is a difficult thing to do for many people, even to the, being by the ocean. 60% of the population around the world lives along a coast, but not everybody gets to the ocean. Not everybody gets to a body of water. And I think what I always tell people is like to get to that respect level is you have to touch water. You have to touch the mountainous range. It doesn't have to be the Himalayas. It could just be a hill down the way from where you live, or a ski hill or something like that. It doesn't have to be a huge mountainous range, but to just understand and be around nature just a little bit more will help you understand, what we're going through. And again, just fall in love with what you see around you and not take it for granted. And I think that's, from hilltops down to the bottom of the Mariana Trench, right? This planet is spectacular. And if we don't start to see that, if we start to take that for granted and live in we live in our phones, we live in our own little world where we're just seeing right in front of us, is to just see the bigger picture. Then we'll start to see a lot more change, and we'll start to see a change for the better.
Okay. So the thing is, Robin, I get scared when I look out of the fifth floor window. So I don't see myself going up a mountain anytime soon. But anyhow, so do you think the world still underestimates how dependent humans are on these natural systems? I mean, I suppose the answer is yes, but can you expand upon it without just saying yes? Can you say a bit more than that?
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with Andrew. If people don't appreciate things, if they don't value things, then they're never going to see any point in looking after them. And that's where we've got to try and get to. And I think actually tourism is a really important part of this, because that is the time when people do perhaps go and touch water or go and touch mountains. It's perhaps the time of the year when they go and do rely on a natural asset for their R&R, for their family time. And I think the tourism needs to play really a very sort of leading role in being able to explain to people precisely what the consequences are going to be. When that lovely natural asset, that beautiful beach, has been washed away because of sea level rise, or maybe there's been a storm surge, which means that the sand is gone and is not coming back. There's a lot of, I think, day-to-day behavior that is actually intrinsically also reliant upon nature, the products that we use, the food that we eat. And I don't think that we're particularly mindful about, buying a mango from Brazil on the other side of the planet any time of year. I don't think that we're mindful of the consequences of the decisions that we make. So if we want to try and teach people to be aware of what they're doing, then tourism needs to step in. And we do that in the Himalaya by working with communities and working with tourists, and the whole ecosystem to actually have the tourists gathering the data about climate change. And they actually ground truth the reality that we get from satellite information. And without the communities and the trekkers working together and gathering data together, we actually wouldn't have a live system, so to speak. We would always be looking back in time, which is what I think a lot of the world does. We talk about tipping points at the beginning, and I think that's a retrospective tipping point that we talk about. What was the case in the last scientific report? Well, we already know that's not the case today. We already know that's changed. So every single time we try and do something, we're relying on history as an indicator. And we know that's perhaps not the best way to plan the future. You can see the general direction, but we need to do something a little bit more proactive than that. So I would love to see tourism stepping into that space. I think it's the only way that we can develop that true appreciation, that valuing of this natural asset that we all live on. But it's a hard, lonely fight sometimes. I'm sure Andrew would agree.
It is. I mean, I think Mark Twain famously said, "History doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes." But I sometimes think it doesn't rhyme very well. And certainly, what we're seeing at the moment, there's not really a lesson from history because it's not happened before. Right. Maybe the dinosaurs could talk about this, yeah. But unfortunately, they're not really around to tell us the story about the meteorite particularly well. Andrew, do you anything to add to what Robin just said?
Yeah, what he mentioned about tourism playing a bigger role. It made me think of a book called The Blue Mind, which was by an author who was a biologist, Wallace J. Nichols. He was a sea turtle biologist, and at some point he started to explore the connection between the color blue and the water with our brains, and he teamed up with a bunch of neuroscientists to look at that connection. Wrote a book called Blue Mind. Highly recommend it. It's probably the Bible, so to speak, for looking into the future and really connecting to nature. And the book essentially says there's a reason why when we decide to take vacations, when many of us decide to take vacations, we go by the water. We go on a beach somewhere in the tropics and we're lying out and we're staring at water, or we're in the water. If you're a diver, if you're a surfer or what have you, many of us go to the tropics and we start to look at the water. We always want to be by the water. Everybody wants to live by the water. They want houses by the water. They want apartments by the water. And it plays a role because it's a calming color. It's a calming effect when you stare out into the ocean. And we talked about this throughout this episode where it's like a mindfulness thing. Everybody's big on mindset and mindfulness. It's a way to relax you. And again, it's being in nature will help you relax, will help you to kind of look around, take a breath, and just enjoy what's around you and really not take it for granted, and just being there and be like, look, we live in a great place where there's a lot of greenery, there's a lot of water, there's everything. And I think that's the way of the future, to be honest, is that connectedness. And that book by Wallace J. Nichols, unfortunately he's no longer with us, so we won't get another one, but it is phenomenal, and I highly recommend it for all your listeners.
Okay, thank
viewers.
you. And that's The Blue Mind, I think you said it was called.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay, so here's the problem. We're 4 minutes over, and there's at least 3 more questions I wanted to ask you. And I don't think I can get rid of any of them, but I'm just going to ask you to answer them super quick, even though they're big questions. What role should businesses and investors play in protecting environmental ecosystems? Are you able to give that a 45 seconds answer each?
I mean, I would say, really it's have the environment, have the planet in mind when you make these investments. There's so many, there's so many things that are being pushed on us. There's so many things that are growing so fast. You've got, Bitcoins and cryptocurrency. You have AI that are being expanded on and being pushed on so fast that we don't have time to make regulations. We don't have time to understand the ramifications. And it's just take that breath to just be like, how is this affecting the planet? You know, is the growth or the money that you're making worth the detriment to the planet? And I think we need people with consciousness, like to go through, and when you invest or when you create a business, to be like, is this good for the planet or is this not? Because sometimes the easy answer is like, yeah, this is great, but it doesn't make sense from like, you know, with it doesn't have the integrity that it needs to help the planet. And so just having that in mind, I think is the biggest thing.
Okay. Robin?
Yeah, if you do not consider the planet as a key shareholder, not a stakeholder, a key shareholder of your organization, you're missing the point.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's very good. I like that. That's very good. That would make a good meme, wouldn't it? I think. We've got to have Gaia on the board of every company. I like that. Okay. So what, if anything, gives you hope when you look at the future of sustainability? Is there any hope out there?
Yeah, of course. There's always an opportunity to be able to do things differently. Whether we're going to be able to do it in a way and in a time frame that isn't going to have some fairly substantial horror show stories will remain to be seen. Only the future will tell. But I think that your clip of David Attenborough at the very beginning captured that very nicely. It's the more we think individually, the greater the chances we shall sink.
Yeah, absolutely. There's hope in everything. I've you know, through the podcast that I have, How to Protect the Ocean, I interview people every day that are making changes, that are working with others to make changes, that are here to tell stories to help us make changes. I work at Pisces Oceans. We're working with indigenous groups. We're working with sustainability companies who are having a net positive impact on the ocean. There are people out there that are willing to put the work in and willing to think about the ocean first and the planet first. And that gives me the hope to see, you know, what we can do in the future and how we can help this planet in the future. I think the biggest thing now is we need the same people or people like them to get into government, to get into the legislature, to get into that lawmaker ability to make better decisions at that scale, at the national and international scale.
Okay, so just imagine that somebody is watching this program in 30 years' time. Somebody who hasn't even been born yet. Okay, so they're watching this show. What do these guys, Robin Boustead and Andrew Lewin, have to say? And it's that idiot up in the top corner there. So what would you say to that person watching this in 30 years' time?
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I wish we could have done more.
Yeah.
What to say? I mean, really? They're going to be dealing with consequences that we can't even imagine. And I think we're kidding ourselves to be able to sit here and say, oh, well, we've got some idea of what life is going to be like in 30 years' time. Now, are we kidding ourselves? We didn't have, I mean, I remember 30 years ago, we didn't have any idea what life was going to be like today. And the speed of change is accelerating. So how on earth are we going to be able to have any idea what it's going to be like in 30 years? I'm sorry. Oh, God, I'm sorry.
Yeah, to add to that, I completely agree. And I would say, I hope that by that time that there is more intelligent conversation happening on a worldwide scale, you know, about the planet, about the environment, about anything. I think we are in an age, especially here on the internet, from no matter what, whether you're talking about environment or you're just talking about regular things, that we're just seeing a decrease in the intelligent conversation and emotional awareness conversation that is happening on a grand scale. And those conversations that are opposite of what I'm talking about are being pushed to the top because they're easier and they relate more. And so I hope by in 30 years, we have changed the message around as we have flipped the script to have more of those intelligent conversations and more of those positive conversations towards the environment and just towards life in general.
Okay, well, thank you very much, guys. We are out of time. We're 10 minutes out of time, but I can hope you, but both of you back on the show again in the not too distant future. But thank you very much. And for people watching this, see you again soon.